Today, let's take a look at Calvin and Hobbes. Not technically a cartoon, but definitely one of the quintessential duos of the Sunday comics. And you know what Calvin reminds me of? No, not my childhood, not any of my make-believe adventures, and definitely not my favorite childhood toy. No, Calvin and his best friends Hobbes really remind me of the 1999 cult film classic Fight Club. I mean, if you think about it, Calvin and the narrator from Fight Club definitely have one big thing in common: imaginary friends. But do you think the narrator from Fight Club is actually just a grown-up Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes? First of all, obviously if we're going to be covering this theory, there's going to be some major Fight Club spoilers. So if you haven't seen Fight Club yet and are ever planning on watching it in the future, this is your warning.
The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
Alright, so this theory states that the narrator from David Fincher's film Fight Club is actually a grown-up version of Calvin from the beloved comic Calvin and Hobbes. And just checking if any of you who haven't seen Fight Club yet are still hanging around, Hobbes is Tyler, a character made up by the narrator. This conspiracy states that when Calvin reaches the 7th grade, he is endlessly bullied by other kids, so he decides to unimagine Hobbes. So he gets rid of his favorite stuffed tiger, believing that this will entirely erase Hobbes from his mind. However, Hobbes, or at least the idea of Hobbes, still lives in a dark corner of Calvin's mind, just waiting for the day that Calvin frees him. And Hobbes still sees everything that Calvin experiences as he learns to deal with the harsh reality of a cruel world. So eventually, Hobbes is recreated, this time as a cussing and overly violent Brad Pitt.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
So if you think about it, these two very different characters do have a major thing in common: their imaginary friend. Both characters pretty much hate their lives. Calvin's only friend is made up from a stuffed tiger, and Hobbes is nothing like Calvin. He balances out Calvin's aggressive and impulsive childish attitude with a cool, collected, and philosophical outlook. So it would kind of make sense that Calvin would be the younger version of the narrator from Fight Club. He still hates his life, so it's possible that he would slip into the old habit of bringing out an imaginary friend. This one, a little more R-rated, but still a cool philosophical guy who happens to have some dirtier habits. But the narrator is still the only person who can see him. Also, both of them seem to end up with bruises all over their body with no explanation. Even when Calvin just imagines having fights with Hobbes, he still ends up with very real bruises. The only explanation for this being, he's probably punching himself, much like the Fight Club narrator. And Fight Club isn't the first time narrator Calvin joins a boys-only club. Of course, Get Rid of Slimy Girls or Growth isn't exactly like Fight Club, but everyone's got to start somewhere. So could these two extremely different characters actually be the same person? Well, if you think about it, this theory is super depressing. Seriously, what could be worse than imagining a kid with a crazy awesome imagination being so jaded by the world that he ends up starring in Fight Club? Well, we may not have to. While the lead character in Fight Club is never actually named in the film, the script refers to him as Jack.
I am Jack's raging bile duct.
So the name Jack is probably just a placeholder for the narrator's name in the script. And actually, it's commonly speculated that I Am Jack comes from the Reader's Digest in the abandoned house. And the narrator uses this to then compensate for his Tyler Durden complex. Now, I may not be a mathematician, but Jack definitely doesn't equal Calvin. And if the character really was Calvin, why wouldn't they write him into the script as Calvin? Plus, if Tyler really is a manifestation of Hobbes, why are they so different? Hobbes is very rational and aware of consequences. He doesn't directly interfere with Calvin's plot, but does warn him of what may come. The two are best friends, but it is clear that Calvin often takes charge. The relationship between Tyler and the narrator is quite the opposite. Tyler drives a lot of the film's events and takes charge, telling the narrator what to do.
You're gonna start a fight with a total stranger.
It's a central conflict in the film. Tyler also takes control of the narrator's body numerous times and is a dissociated personality. Hobbes has his own physical form that exists very separately from Calvin. Other than this, it's really hard to find any solid evidence on this theory from the creators. Seen as the only ending we know to Calvin and Hobbes is the famous Let's Go Exploring comic. Author Bill Watterson, once described as the Bigfoot of comics by Pearls Before Swine author Stephen Pastis, has said essentially nothing about what happens to Calvin and Hobbes after this. In fact, he has barely said anything at all since the comic's conclusion 20 years ago. As for Fight Club, author of the book for which the film was based off of, Chuck Palahniuk, said his inspiration for the story came from his diagnosis of insomnia and his co-worker's reluctance to ask about his black eye. He's also said that in writing Fight Club, he was really just writing Great Gatsby updated a little, which presented a new social model for men to share their lives. Not too much about a bullied little boy with a former make-believe tiger friend. So on the plausibility meter, I give the Calvin and Hobbes Fight Club conspiracy 2 bars of soap out of 5. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Cartoon Conspiracy. In the comments, let me know what you thought of this conspiracy and if you agree or disagree with how I explained it. If you guys have a suggestion for a conspiracy you'd like us to cover, leave it in the comments, send us an email, or even make a video and we might just feature it. Make sure you subscribe to channel Frederator and I'll see you guys next week.